I've designed apps and websites for over a decade, and when I look back at my own design journey, one thing is clear. There are patterns to the kinds of mistakes you make as a designer at every level of your career. In this video, I will highlight those patterns of mistakes, what they are, when they typically happen, and how to fix them so that you can reach your next design level faster. Here's how we'll do it. We will take a screen from a real client project in my agency portfolio and redesign it, starting from an unpaid beginner level, iterating all the way to a high-ticket senior level. For each level, we will call out the biggest mistakes while providing resources and guidelines so that you can avoid them. And then by the end of the video, we'll dig into a hidden mistake that even lots of senior designers make, and a solution that can really set you apart in this AI era that we're in. Let's get started. So at the beginner level, nothing works. However, this isn't a surprise since we have less than a year of experience and we're not getting paid for our work yet. But let's dive into why it doesn't work. The first mistake in this design is something as simple as the copywriting. For example, do we really need 4 words to communicate a user's rewards? And does it make sense for the button to be about earning tokens when the action is actually about claiming voting rewards? Clarity is key in copywriting, and we're not really nailing it here. Therefore, it's a fail on the first principle, which brings us to the visuals. Lots of beginners will overuse flashy gradients, blur effects, and other cool visual techniques like that. And to be fair, even mid-level designers do this, but the difference is that they make it work. More on that later. The best quick tip I can give here is, if you're unsure, opt for simplicity instead of flashiness. A simple but clear graph will help a user much more than a fancy graph that is hard to understand. In this case, since we went for fancy and we couldn't pull it off, it's a fail. But what about the colors? First off, we're using too much of a very strong red color, which makes the UI straight up stressful to look at. Everything here is screaming for attention, and therefore nothing gets attention. Not even the things we want to highlight in the UI. Now, to make coloring a bit easier, try the 60-30-10 approach. 60% of the UI is a neutral color, like white or light gray. 30% of the UI is a complementary color, like black. And 10% of the UI has the main brand color, in this case, red. This UI feels more like a reverse at the moment. And while that could work, here it doesn't. Now, however, it's time to count the font sizes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 different font sizes are used here, and 4 different font weights. It's impossible to create a great looking UI with this much variety in the text department. So here's the easy fix. Try to reduce those numbers that we just talked about, 6 and 4, by at least 2. So 4 sizes and 2 weights. That will take you really far. In this case though, it's a fail, but we're not done. We don't need to look super closely to see that things aren't really aligned in here. And the things that are aligned are spaced out randomly. 11 pixels here, 25 pixels here, just random numbers. So here's a little trick to improve spacing quickly. It's called the 8-point grid system. The main idea is that anytime you use a number in your design, make it divisible by 8 or 4. Instead of 25 pixels, use 24. Instead of 11, use 12. I actually have a full video on this that you can check out after this one, linked down in the description below. Anyways, unfortunately, we fail here as well. That's 6 out of 6 fails, a pretty rough start. Surprisingly though, lots of progress happens with just 1 year of design obsession, which brings us to the junior designer. But before we go there, if you want to learn from even more real-world projects, you can check out a full case study of this and other projects that we've designed at ZipZap in the link I've shared down in the description below. Now, time for the junior designer. Here we have a person with 1 to maybe 3 years of experience designing apps and websites. They're likely either working in-house somewhere or making anywhere from $100 to maybe $500 doing smaller design gigs as a freelancer. And usually copywriting is still a big issue at this level. We still add unnecessary words and write labels that don't really make sense. For example, commit time sounds like we're committing time instead of votes. These are small details that make a lot of difference if we improve it. So how do we do that? The easiest solution nowadays is just to take a screenshot of your UI, pop it into ChatGPT, and then feed it some more context on the project, emphasizing that you want copy that is clear but short. For now though, it's still a fail. But that means that we get a shot at redemption for the visuals. And here we've actually stepped it up. Now we understand that visuals primarily serve a communication purpose, especially if it's a graph, like in this case. And the red dot, in contrast to the gray bars here, communicates to the user, this is a thing we want you to focus on. Sadly though, we still think visuals absolutely need a trendy skeuomorphic effect with 45 layers of shadows. But it's fine, we're still learning. So a first half pass and we're back to the colors. As juniors, we have enough experience to know that mixing colors too freely easily turns into a disaster. We also understand that overusing a color could work against you if you want to assign meaning to colors. So we're generally more passive when it comes to color usage, which actually is a very good thing and one of the most important learnings for creating clean, professional interfaces. But it's a balance. Here we went from a UI that overused our red main color to a UI that now barely uses any of it, which makes it a bit dull and therefore just a half pass. In terms of font sizes, we still have issues. Too big sizes, too small sizes, too many sizes. It still happens at this level, understandably. So sadly, it's a pretty quick fail here that segues into spacing and structure again. And we've made progress, but it's evident that there's still no calculated approach to how we space or structure elements. Pixel values are still a bit random, which tells me that someone forgot to study the 8-point grid method. So it's a fail. That puts us at 2 out of 5 half passes. And while that might not seem great, we're moving in the right direction here. The design we saw isn't close to be worth serious money, but things are about to change at our next stage, the mid-level. Before we jump into that though, I'm curious, how would you score your own design skills and how many years of experience do you have? Let me know in the comments. Now, things start to get interesting. We have somewhere between 3 and 6 years of design experience, and we can potentially, at this point, rack in 8 to 10K USD per month, with projects likely ranging anywhere from 3 to 6K. And this is clearly reflected in the design. The copywriting is now even clearer. There's a sense of it being written for an actual user. It still might not be the prettiest, but it definitely looks better, which means that we have our first half pass on copy. But what about the visuals? They look good, maybe a bit overworked, which is something we usually see with mid-level designers. Just like beginners would add and add and add to the visuals, designers at the mid-level can sometimes gravitate back towards that same behavior. At this point of their career though, they have a much more trained design eye, which allows them to make it work. So while it's not perfect, it's clearly a half pass, which means we're stepping into colors with momentum. As a mid-level designer, we know that UIs don't need all the colors of the rainbow to look good. We know how to balance the UI by using different shades or tints of one color instead of multiple different colors. If you want pro tips on shading and tinting, check out Erik D. Kennedy's article that I linked down below. Anyways, it's a good old half pass, and we're back at the point where the juniors still tripped up, the font department. But now, for the first time, we understand how to use fonts in a UI. We have less sizes, we have less weights, and while some sizes and weights might still be a bit off, it's starting to look cleaner. Half pass, and onto the last point before we reach the senior level and the hidden mistake. And for spacing and structure, it's looking pretty good. Related elements are grouped nicely. We've started to use a spacing system like the 8-point grid. And as a result, the UI feels more professional. It's not entirely cooked, like the young crowd might say, but it's definitely a half pass, which brings us to 5 out of 5 half passes and the final boss. As a senior designer, you have at least 7 years of experience, which means you have designed so many websites and apps that you're a safe bet for clients that want both beautiful design, but also design that actually drives business metrics. That's why you will see deals all the way from 20K to over 100K from senior designers. Sounds crazy? Let's dive into how it's possible. First of all, the difference in copywriting here might look subtle, but when we actually study the words and the length of the words, it all just harmonizes so much better. Because as a senior, we find ways to communicate better with less. We know that we don't need to write last 10 votes when we have a big label right above saying voting, or claim UMA if we have a heading saying UMA rewards. And by not repeating the same words, we reduce cognitive load and visual clutter without sacrificing clarity. And I know that might sound like a minor detail, but when you scale this across a full app, it's a massive difference. So we have our first full pass, and we're ready to talk about the visuals again. They are now clearly made with careful thought. We add emphasis only to what matters, and we help the user make immediate connections between different parts of the UI by reusing visual patterns. For example, here the commit part of the UI gets connected to the current voting period in the graph because we're using the same pulsing circle. We're achieving more with less. It's a full pass, but what about the colors? Well, here we basically just simplified what the mid-level designer did. Instead of gradients, just simple, flat colors. Instead of a button that screams error states, we're saving the red color for the graph, the rewards icon, and the commit indicator. It's nicer on the eyes while calling attention to the right things even more effectively. It's our third full pass, which brings us back to the fonts. We're finally down to only 4 font sizes and 2 font weights. You can see here that we introduced a monospace version of the font for big numbers. And to avoid collision when this reward number grows, we reused the heading size from the voting label for our decimal fractions. And that's all it takes. We're full passing again as we bring out our rulers. And dang, this is what we call structure. Elements are grouped logically. Spacing is deliberate between elements, inside elements, everywhere. Those 7+ years of experience are becoming really evident. Full freaking pass. We're 5 out of 5. Full score. But what about that hidden mistake that even senior designers make? Well, I'm glad you brought it up. Let's talk about it. This mistake doesn't have anything to do with static UI or UX skills. Because as you saw, senior designers are capable of creating great looking, well-functioning interfaces. But thanks to AI, in the coming years, we're going to see an exponential increase in the amount of apps that are available to us, which means that designing memorable experiences that connects us with technology is going to be the easiest way to stand out as a designer. And the mistake most designers make, again, seniors included, is that we get stuck just focusing on static images. But to create a true experience, we need to treat UI design more like a movie. We need to piece static screens together in a way that makes the app a pleasure to use. That's how we create truly delightful apps, and as a result, also drastically increase our price tags as designers. Look at Phantom Wallet, Airbnb, and even Duolingo. Those are all great examples of apps that have gone that extra mile. Which raises the question, how do you achieve this? Well, that is a topic that is out of scope for this video, but luckily, if you're interested in a breakdown of these kinds of apps and how they create memorable experiences, I have a video on that here that you can check out. Now, until the next one, I want you to have an amazing everything, and we'll talk soon.